Patience Oniha and Ayo Teriba, CEO, Economic Associates, both join us tonight on Newsnight. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me start with you, DG Oniha. You seem in that report to have, be justifying Nigeria's debt and borrowing. First of all, as DMO, apart from, advising government and approving the borrowing plan of government, are there times when you actually, tell government, hey, thus far you can go, you've gone too far, it's time to put the brakes on the borrowing? And what are do you have any concerns at all that the, debt profile may be rising?
Oh, yes, we do. Let me start by thanking you for inviting me. And that was covered at the press briefing today. So we said that the DMO advises the government using the tool called the debt sustainability analysis every year that determines what the maximum space is for the government in terms of what it can borrow. And that is advice to the government. So that's the first level. And I think if you've listened to some of the presentations and contributions we've made at various fora, we've always said that while government may need to borrow in the short term, we certainly need an aggressive drive on revenue, as well as encourage public-private partnerships so as to reduce the level of government borrowing. So we're very clear on our position.
Okay, Mr. Teriba, let me ask you, the debt to GDP ratio is currently at 22.47, still remains within Nigeria's self-imposed percentage limit. But what seems to be raising eyebrows for a lot of people is the debt to revenue ratio. I wonder if you also have a problem with that. But with the figures ruled out by the DMO and the statement released, Mr. Teriba, is there cause for alarm? Are we heading to another debt trap?
Thank you very much. Good evening. I would like to start by commending the Debt Management Office, led by the Director General, for keeping the nation adequately informed about the debt situation. It would be nice if other agencies can follow suit. Then, to address the two specific issues that you have raised, about debt to GDP ratio, means nothing. Is a very, very misleading metric in that debt is a stock and GDP is a flow. It means nothing. Some of the best countries with excellent debt management have more than 100% of GDP in debt, and it means nothing. The global average GDP, debt to GDP ratio is more than 300%, and it means nothing. What means something is the ratio of your debt to your assets. And what it means is that if you own, as long as you own more than you owe, you are solvent. If your debt is more than your assets, you are insolvent. So let's get it right. Now, the second problem that you raised, the debt to revenue ratio, that in 2020, Nigeria's interest payment was in excess of the total revenue of the federal government. We got 3.99 trillion and we paid 4 trillion. Last year, it was 4.6 trillion out of 6 trillion revenue, 76% of the revenue for the year. That is alarming. I had the comments made by the DG that VAT is low, this is low. Yeah, but the point is, we compass land and sea to collect revenue, and then we turn around to pay it on interest. That's not efficient, and we need to look into. So the issue with the Nigerian debt is that the costs at which we contract debt, are too high, and that speaks to the quality of the debt that we issue. Other countries borrow much more, but they issue higher quality debt. Saudi Arabia just issued some books in which there was a negative return on the debt. We are issuing at 8%, where, in parts of the world interest rates are zero. So we need to raise the quality of our debt. Our debt portfolio is 100% IOUs, 100% promissory notes, but higher quality debts go beyond IOUs and promissory notes. They are rated investment grade by leading global debt rating agencies. We don't have any investment grade debt, and we should be working hard to raise, the component of our debt portfolio that is investment grade. The main, difference between mere promissory notes and investment grade debt being that they are linked to assets. So you are not the one who has to come and look for money to pay interest. Investors look to the assets for them.
All right, let me quickly bring in the DG. I'm sure you heard what Mr. Teriba said there about the high cost of borrowing. I mean, unlike what obtains in other, parts of the world. Let me even quote last year's debt servicing to revenue ratio stood at 76.5%, meaning that for every 1 naira revenue, Nigeria spends 76 kobo, in payment of interest debt. So the question is, how does Nigeria come out of this vicious cycle, and especially the high debt, costs? Yes, this question, of course, is to the DG of the DMO. And, what would be your recommendations in terms of alternatives to borrowing? Are there other alternatives that DMO can come up with for the Nigerian government?
Thank you very much. I lost contact with you, so I didn't hear most of what Dr. Teriba said. But when he talks about cost, about the high cost of government debt, the Nigerian government on the external scene borrows largely from concessional sources, meaning below 3% per annum from the World Bank, the African Development Bank. Okay, so our external debt, 60% of it is still concessional, priced below 3%. In the domestic side, we borrow in the markets. Okay, so we borrow at market rates. So when he says rates are high, I don't know which alternative rates he's referring to. Then secondly, speaking directly to your question, debt service to revenue is high, and we have to admit to that. But the point we always make is that with growing debt levels, your debt service to revenue will grow if the revenue does not grow at the same magnitude or at a higher level. So I don't want us to miss that equation when we're analyzing debt service to revenue. Okay, so your debt has grown, but revenues have not grown, to make up for the incremental debt service. And that's why debt service to revenue has been growing. Okay, so what are the alternatives that the DMO has proffered to government, or for that matter, decisions have been taken at higher levels? Again, we made presentations on that during the presentation this morning, and position has also been in the public space. Reduce the level of on-balance sheet project borrowing, meaning government should not keep borrowing to finance all the projects, the infrastructure that need to be financed. Of course, we cannot continue to borrow to finance them anyway. The requirements for infrastructure are so high. Okay, but even then, we should begin to encourage the private sector to finance various projects so that on-balance sheet borrowings are reduced. And what did we explain? We gave about 4 examples of what the government has done in this regard. One is that the government provides guarantees as appropriate after proper evaluation to private sector entities who want to finance capital projects that support the government. So in that case, the government doesn't borrow or go pay interest expense. It's the private sector financing, and the government is only given a guarantee. So the public debt does not grow in that case. It's only a guarantee and it's off balance sheet. But if you take it further from there, The government launched an infrastructure tax credit about 2 years ago, and a number of companies have taken advantage of that. Essentially, companies are encouraged to take up roads under that arrangement, which they can finance, and then they can deduct the cost from their taxes. So the government is not borrowing to finance those roads. It is the private sector that is doing that. The third component, which I would mention again, which is huge, is the infrastructure corporation that was, I believe, introduced last year with a seed capital of 1 trillion naira, owned by 3 very reputable institutions: the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Africa Finance Corporation, and the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. Again, for those, it is to say government does not have to put money together to finance infrastructure. Let's create a vehicle for financing infrastructure where that capital that has been put together by the shareholders, the 1 trillion naira, can be leveraged upon, meaning private sector entities can be contracted to leverage on those funds, okay, in their own names, to finance various projects in the country. Essentially, what we're talking about is reducing the level of direct government borrowing by encouraging PPP arrangements, and those are already going on. The other component which we talked about was increasing revenues. We can't stop talking about that one. So because you already have a level of debt stock with debt service, again, like I said, about 60% of the external there is on concessional terms. So you have debt service that you pay on those. Grow your revenues so that your need for borrowing will be reduced expectedly, and then your debt service to revenue would be lower. But make sure you encourage the private sector to finance capital projects, whether they're in infrastructure or health or education and the like.
So all right, Madam DG, if you can hear me. Great. So revenue is important. It's revenue, revenue, revenue. Mr. Teriba, very quickly, you've listened to the DMO DG, but how realistic are these plans? And some of the initiatives to also ensure debt sustainability include improving tax systems and plug-in leakages, amongst other things. But what's your take? Is it realistic?
Okay, I have nothing to add to what she has said, but I have 2 alternatives to suggest, you know, to the 2 solutions that the DG has provided. Nobody is going to disagree with that Nigeria needs to raise revenue. But where some of us disagree with the government is that in the current global realities, you can raise more revenue from your assets, from your balance sheet, than from taxes. Your economy is in recession, it's struggling to escape, you know, the pains of a pandemic. It's wrong, it's misleading to expect more revenue from such an economy. Most countries give tax holidays, they subsidize even if they have to borrow to do so. That's one. But we have a lot of idle assets that can generate revenue. We are not talking about those. That's one. Number 2, in addition to all the ways the DG has listed to ease the, you know, resort to debt, I want to also suggest that on our balance sheet, debt is not the only type of liability that we can issue. You can also issue equity. And I don't know why, you know, if you look at, you know, the preference of the Nigerian government, they only have debt, you know, in their portfolio. They don't have any equity issue in the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So government, you know, has, you know, almost 100% of the debt issues in the bond market and has no issue in the equity market. Issue equity. You know, foreign direct investment is equity if you move abroad. We only issue Euro bonds. We never issue equity investment opportunity. And other countries are issuing equity investment opportunities, or even the one between outright debt, promissory note, and equity, which is securitized debt, debts that are linked to assets, which are easily convertible to equity. That's the only addition I would like to make.
And we would like to thank both of you very much for your thoughts and your analysis on this subject matter. Director General of the Debt Management Office, the DMO Patience Oniha and Ayo Teriba, CEO Economic Associates. Thank you both for being on the news tonight.